Good evening. We'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting for Thursday, February 17th. First agenda item, approval of the minutes from January 13th.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Second item on the agenda, update 2021 financial audit.
Yes. And tonight we have Nicoletta McTigg from Clifton Larson, who's our auditing firm. And she's going to make a presentation on our 6/30/21 financial audit.
Thank you, Mona. Good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody. Everyone should have gotten a PDF or hard copies of the financial report that we issued. I'll go through a prepared presentation. I'm open for questions at any time. I can go through the presentation, or you can interrupt me anytime as needed. So my prepared presentation will go through terms of engagement, executive summary of the audit results. I included some financial highlights in the presentation, federal and single audit results, required communication to those charged with governance, and I listed some of the GASB pronouncements that are going to be applicable for the next two fiscal years. So we were engaged to give an opinion on whether the basic financial statements are presented in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, to express an in relation to opinion on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards and schedule of expenditures of state financial assistance, and to express an opinion on compliance related to major federal programs and major state programs. We were engaged to provide a report on internal control over financial reporting as required by government auditing standards, and to provide a report on internal control over compliance related to major federal awards and the major state programs. On the next slide of the I have an executive summary of the results related to financial statement reporting. We expressed an unmodified opinion on the basic financial statements, and that's the best opinion available. Included in the auditor's report, there is an emphasis on matter paragraph, which allows the reader to know that the town reassessed GASB 84 fiduciary activities and made a change and restatement in financial statement to now report the student activity funds from custodial funds to special revenue funds. And to do that was based on additional guidance that was given from GASB on what the student activity funds should be considered as either custodial or special revenue funds. So after management, Mona, went through the questionnaire and evaluated all the answers, the determination was made that the fund should be reported now as a special revenue fund and not as a custodial fund. So our opinion was not modified related to that restatement. And there were no findings reported on internal controls over financial reporting. Both for state and federal single audit, we issue similar reports, which are the report on compliance with the requirements, and another one is internal control over those compliance requirements. Both type of reports for both state and federal single audits were clean. So we expressed an unmodified opinion on major programs that we tested and on related to compliance, and we did not have any internal control findings over those compliance requirements. On slide 5, there is a summary of all the governmental activities, and they are shown comparatively to prior year. So included in this page are all funds of the town, with the exception of the trust, fiduciary trust funds, which are the pension and OPEB, other post-employment benefit trust funds. So all the other funds of the town, general fund, special revenue fund, capital project funds, internal service fund, are included in this column. As you can see, total net position of the town at year end was $36 million versus $33.3 million in the prior year. Included in these financial statements are all the long-term assets and liabilities, such as land, buildings, equipment, and long-term liabilities, such as net OPEB or net pension liabilities, debt outstanding, and all that. And I'll give some further down. I have some amounts related to those major liabilities included in the financial statements. On page 6, there is a snapshot of, as of June 30th, 2021, of the governmental funds fund balance. Total governmental funds at year end had a fund balance of $2.8 million, and included in that total is a total of $7 million for the general fund. The change in the fund balance year over year for all governmental funds was actually a decrease of $13 million, and that's mostly for the capital project funds, and that's because of the timing when the expenditures are happening and when the funding, the bond issuance happens for the fund. So as you can see, their capital project funds have a total negative fund balance. If you go on the next page, general fund, as you can see on page 5, on page 6, on page 7, there's more detail behind the numbers on the general fund as far as the categories go. So total is $7.1 million. Assigned is $2.1 million, and included on the assigned category is assigned for subsequent year's budget, $1.1 million, and encumbrances of roughly $1 million. And that leaves unassigned fund balance of $4.9 million, which is roughly 6% of the total general fund budgetary expenditures. And the next slide, it's just a picture of how the fund balance has moved, percentage of unassigned fund balance related to expenditures and transfers out year over year. To stay with the general fund, there are a couple of ways that the results are measured. One is the gap, which are the numbers I just talked about, and the other one are general fund budget results. In the big report, there could be found on the section that's called Require Supplementary Information, and we call them RSI 1 and RSI 2, where you'll see in more detail the revenue results of the revenue and the expenditures related to the general fund. In summary, general fund revenues were $2.1 million lower than budget. General fund expenditures were $1.5 million lower than budget. Property tax collections were $732,000 under budget, and collection rate was 98.6% compared to 99.2% in the prior year. On the next slide, there is some information, financial information related to other funds that are reported in the financial report, in the annual comprehensive financial report. First one is Internal Service Fund, and that's for the health insurance for the Board of Ed. The net position at year end was $52,000, so that fund is it doesn't carry a large net position. As far as fiduciary funds go, there are two funds in there, pension trust funds and the OPEB trust fund. Had a total net position of $91.2 million, of which $88.2 million was related to the restricted for pension, and $3 million was restricted for other post-employment benefit, or OPEB. On page 11, there is some more information related to net pension liability. Actually, a couple of the funds have an asset at year end. So there are 4 individual pension plans: general employees, police officers, firefighters, and ambulance. And 2 of them, the general and police officers, have a net asset at year end, so it means that they are more than 100% funded. And firefighters and ambulance have a liability of $850,000 and $172,000 respectively. As far as the percentage of funding, general employees and police officers are 108 and 100.2%, and firefighters and ambulance are 68.6 and 85% funded. OPEB liability at year end is $19.8 million, and I believe there was a decrease from $23 million from prior year. In the table there, you'll see two columns. One is for the town piece of the healthcare plan, and the other one is for the Board of Education plan. The town piece is funded and has about $3 million in the plan, in the trust fund. The Board of Education piece is not funded and basically follows the pay-as-you-go year over year. So based on that, the town's plan is 14% funded, and Board of Education is 0% funded, so it's a non-funded plan. So this concludes the summary of the financial report. And the next couple slides, I have some numbers related to the federal and the state single audit. Total federal awards expended for the year were $4.2 million in comparative with the prior year of $1.8 million. We tested two major programs for the year, Child Nutrition Cluster and Highway Planning and Construction Cluster. As I mentioned in the beginning, we expressed an unmodified opinion on compliance for all the compliance requirements for both programs that we tested, and there were no findings on internal control over compliance with those compliance requirements. State single audit, the town spent $7.7 million of state awards. Of that, $1.7 million were subject to the audit, and I put their prior year numbers, 9.8 total and $2.2 million subject to the audit. We tested three major programs: local transportation capital improvement program, reimbursement tax laws on state-owned property, and municipal grant and aid. The numbers and the name of the programs are listed there. Again, for all three programs that we tested, we expressed unmodified opinion, and we did not identify any findings of internal controls over compliance related to these programs we tested. So that's a summary of the single audits. The next couple slides, I've listed required auditors' communication. First one will be the new standards that were adopted or reassessed for the current year. Again, is GASB 84. As I mentioned initially, the change that happened is student activities are now reported as special revenue funds. Included in the financial statements, there are several assumptions, several estimates that, based on assumptions that were used to come up with those estimates, those numbers could be different if different assumptions were used. So readers have to be aware that some of those numbers could have been different if different assumptions were chosen by the management. As auditors, we look at those assumptions and we deem them appropriate for the town. The four items that are significant estimates in the financial statements are listed on that slide 14. Net pension liability, net OPEB liability, capital asset useful life, which in turn will determine depreciation expense, and incurred but not reported liability, and that is for the internal service fund for the Board of Ed. On the next slide, we did not have any disagreements with management. Management did not consult with any other accountants to shop for opinion. We did not encounter any difficulties in performing the audit. On the contrary, I have to commend Mona and her department and John for their readiness for the audit and their professionalism on getting ready for our audit. One immaterial, uncorrected misstatement was noticed during the audit, and that was for the FEMA grant. So under modified accrual accounting, when you record a receivable, you record the other side as revenue only if you receive within what's called availability period, which is 60 days after year end. If the money comes after 60 days of the year end, then you have to show it as deferred inflow. So those are government accounting rules. The town recognized the revenue on fiscal year 21, but it was received after 60 days, so technically it should have been reported as revenue for fiscal year 22, but because the amount was immaterial, management decided to not make the change from one year to another. And as auditors, we are okay with that because it's an immaterial adjustment, but we are required to report that to you. And that amount was $217,000. There were no independence issues. So in order for us to perform the audit, we have to be independent of the town, and we were. The next couple slides, there's a series of GASBs that are going to be implemented in the next couple of years, but I bolded two of them. The first one is Statement 87 leases, and on the second page is Statement 96, subscription-based information technology arrangements. Those two statements, even though they are separate, they are very similar to each other. They basically go over the agreements, they are lease agreements, but since the subscription-based information technology arrangements were not subject of the GASB 87, they have their own GASB, lucky them. We've discussed this GASB with management for the last couple of years, been upfront, given all the information that's needed, discussed the implications of the implementing the GASB and how much that work that will require to be implemented based on how many leases are out there. And I believe Mona is in process. I know she has an inventory, is in process of evaluating them,
Right.
And how they are going to be reported. For anybody's knowledge, the biggest change that will happen is that there's no more distinction between operating leases and capital leases. Everything is a lease, and if it's over 12 months, an agreement is over 12 months, a liability is going to be reported on the government-wide financial statements for the lease, and obviously an asset will be the other side of that. Because in the past will be just a footnote disclosure for all the operating leases, and only capital leases will be in the financial statements. And so that will be the biggest change. It sounds like it's not much, but it's a lot to go through all the contracts and make sure that they are evaluated properly and reported correctly in the financial statement. So that's all I had prepared. Any questions?
Open it up to questions.
I just had a quick question about, this is more of the subsequent year, or the year we're in, I guess. So will you have to get involved as far as the use of the American Relief Plan funds we've gotten from the federal government, as far as making sure?
So they are going to be subject to federal single audit. So when we do, and actually we were talking to Mona and John, we were discussing like, what is it, are you guys going to be using it for? But yes, our involvement is going to be to audit the use of the money to make sure the expenditures that are being reported to the Treasury actually are expenditures that are allowed under the Treasury rules. And the latest, the final interim rule actually made it a lot easier for smaller communities that receive under $10 million to on how to account for it and where to spend the money. It opened up a lot of capital project expenditures too, which is, from what I hear from everybody, kind of sigh of relief, because everybody has a laundry list of capital projects to do, and this is a time now maybe,
Yeah.
if there are no other uses. But yeah, our involvement is going to be in auditing those.
Right.
But our firm, CLA, has a consulting group that is actually works mostly with non-clients, because if you work with clients, we have to be to make sure that there's no independence issues there on guiding them. And CLA has created a portal for quite a few clients where they do all their application and reporting to ready for the federal government. So depending on relationship we have with the clients, there are certain things that we can do, certain things that we cannot do, but we are definitely going to audit the use of that money.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question about the pension liabilities. I don't know if it's best addressed to you or John or Mona, but you have it broken out into 4 categories: general employees, police, fire, and ambulance. And for 2 columns, we're showing surpluses, and then for 2, we're showing deficits. My question is the money segregated in 4 separate buckets, or so it can't be aggregated?
Correct. Those are all 4 different plans for different trusts that you cannot segregate the money. John, you can.
Wait, you said you cannot segregate them?
You cannot aggregate the money. It has to
Cannot
stay
aggregate.
segregated. Yes.
Each one of those plans you mentioned, Bill, is a trust fund, and those funds have to be used for that designated plan.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
And then the reason the fire and the ambulance are below is because of the changes we made to the pension plan a couple of years ago.
Right.
So it's caught up with us.
Catching up, yep.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
I had a question, I had the same basic question that John just answered, so that's great. The only other question, I guess, Mona, the 732,000 that were under budget on the property tax collections, I know we continue to collect those. And just has there been progress since the fiscal year end on collecting the prior year?
Yes, actually, well, I was going to share that in my report later
Okay.
on today, but we are
Spoiler
making
alert.
some progress. So our prior year collections are up, not to the tune of the 700,000. You know, we're, like, last year, we were at about 100,000, we're probably at about 250, not with having the numbers in front of me, but we're collecting better than we had on prior year collections. But it may be, I know we hate to say it, but it may be time to revisit a tax sale, because we don't do it every year, but we've probably had that time period between, so it may be something to look at.
Okay, very good. And congratulations to both you and John on a unmodified opinion and no internal control issues. So those are two good things to hear when you're hearing an auditor's report. So,
Guys, follow up with a question on the collections. Mona, is most of the shortfall this year on the real estate side versus personal property versus motor vehicles? Is there any one category that's particularly driving it?
Shortfall on the audited year?
Yeah.
Well, it was more on no, I wouldn't say it was one side or the other, for the most part. I think the motor vehicle side, I know, I hate to do it, Stuart, but the motor vehicle does tend to lag, but that's more on the billing and the mobility of the taxpayers. But they all had kind of a trend of being slow in the collection. But for the 700,000 overall, for a $78 million line item, that was still a good collection period. So.
The state also went to a 3-year registration period. So when it was 2 years, we'd always catch them on after the second year, because they would need to re-register their car. And so they would come in and pay their tax. Now with a 3-year cycle, we're gonna have to wait a third year to get that right.
I see. Thank you.
no other questions for Nicoletta. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got you
Continue
out of the house.
an in-person meeting.
That's good.
Move on to agenda item 3.
Start the music.
Discussion and possible action, award a bid, Center
Get the Center
Cemetery Maintenance
sorry.
and Lawn Service.
Yeah, jumping the gun.
Well, this will be quick, and then we'll go to Stuart really quickly. But we did have a bid for the Sunder Cemetery Lawn Service that we had in the end of January. We had one company that responded to the bid. That was the same company that we have in place. It was for a 2-year bid. It's actually finishing out the current fiscal year, going into the 22-23 year. And the bid came in for $19,885. So we are requesting that we authorize this bid to Central Connecticut Services for mowing. It's based on a 20 mowing events. Of course, it could be, greater than, but this is what we base the bid on for quantifying and evaluating the bid. So we're asking that we can award this bid to Central Connecticut Services for the Center Cemetery Lawn Service.
I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I guess, John, we're looking to move to put this on the agenda for the town council?
It'll be on the consent.
Consent.
Yes. Okay, so I move to place the proposed resolution concerning the retention of Central CT Services LLC for cemetery lawn care to the consent agenda of the next meeting of the town council.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. All right, now for the big discussion. The town assessor for the October 2021 grand list. Welcome, Stuart.
I got a few handouts.
Uh-oh, he's got the books.
Light reading. I don't know if I have enough for everybody.
Oh,
Sorry.
we'll have to postpone Stuart to.
Oh, it's just,
But there's one-
it's one.
multiple.
document.
I thought you got a
Take
book.
top one and pass it down.
Got it, yeah.
Thank you.
But it's just articles on what I'm about to tell you, so you don't have to, see. It's-
Joanne, you need one for the records?
So it's not just me coming up with it and making data.
You're going to be okay with that, John?
Yeah.
Just 3 of those.
Yeah.
I'm gonna assume you got something like this in your packet.
Yep.
Okay. So in a nutshell, I think real estate went up about 0.25%, around $4 million or so. The personal property went down about 3%, about $4 million. So real estate and personal property canceled each other out. But your growth is in motor vehicles, about $43.5 million. That represents about just short of 25% increase. What does that mean to me and you? In July, there's going to be a lot of upset taxpayers. Because how could my car go up in value from last year when it's older, more mileage, more this, more that? But if people were watching the news in the last 2 years, and you drive by the car dealerships, there are no cars. So with demand very high and supply very low, values of cars have gone up greatly. I had just a week or two ago a gentleman come in. He bought his car. His car came off lease, and the buyout was $22,000. Most of the people in the past would turn in their car, get a new one, whatever, because the buyout was always higher than what the market value was. In this case, he bought it for $22,000, and he sold it to a wholesale car dealer for $31,000. It's like, and he took a loan out. He had the loan for 3 days and paid the loan off, made $9,000. So that's what we're seeing on our side. So when in July comes,
Stuart, where are you getting your numbers from for the cars?
the values come from the NADA guide, which is the recommended guide that the Office of Policy and Management from the state tells us we have to use. That's where they come from. So that's what we used, and that's where the increase is coming. And so the town is going to have, if you don't adjust the mill rate, you're going to have an increase in your revenue this year, but it's just going to be on the motor vehicle side, and that's the biggest. It's usually not this way. It's usually a small increase in motor vehicles, and then everything else comes from personal property and motor vehicle. But this year, last year we had a larger increase in personal property because businesses purchased, laptops and stuff for people to work at home. And now this year, those people are starting to come back to the office. And those assets have depreciated. And then the new construction's coming for commercial. It's coming. We have a few tax incentives out there for like Burris and the new health facility on Cromwell Avenue, but that growth is going to come in a couple of years on the real estate side. But this year, your growth is in the 1.85% on the grand list all came from motor vehicle. So.
Right, but Stuart, the important piece of people don't panic. While the auto values have gone up, we haven't set a mill rate yet. So
Right.
It doesn't mean necessarily the tax is going up at this
Right.
point.
That is true.
Just take the panic word out, before people start looking at that piece.
Yep. So the mill rate hasn't been set. Those are, do 9 people do that. I know there's only 3 of you here today.
Yep.
So based on that, we tell everybody you got to wait till the budget's set.
Right.
And that's the big thing that differentiates, Rocky Hill from where I live, Berlin. Our budgets are $10 million apart. I don't know why. They won't tell me. But,
Who's higher, Stuart?
my town, Berlin.
Oh, Berlin.
I think we have like 30 more employees in Berlin than just on the town side than Rocky Hill does. It's like crazy.
Make a lot there.
And then when I suggest to them, hey, you could do it more efficiently if you did it this way, they're like, no, we're going to do it our own way. And it's like, I don't know. In a lot of ways, Rocky Hill gets it right. It does, especially when I'm comparing it to my own town. I scratch my head and go, wow, why are we doing it that way? When I know we could do it a different way, more efficiently, better, and all that, because we do it that way here.
So Stuart, if I could just, with your new inflated car values, do you project out that things may get back to normal and then we'll see a major drop in the value of used cars? So
Reading the news articles, I've read that towards the second half of this year, the market should stabilize and there should be more supply. The automakers, I believe I was reading about General Motors, they were saying the second half of this year they expect to have normal production. So I would assume with that the supply will start meeting demand again, which I would just assume would lower the car price values on cars. One of the biggest issues they're having right now is during the beginning of COVID, nobody was traveling, nobody was renting cars, so all the car rental companies sold their fleets. So now they need to resupply their fleets with cars. So they're competing with regular people like us, as well as companies trying to replace what they sold off during the pandemic. So the second half of this year, from what I've been reading, should be a decrease in car values, or at least an increase in supply, which I would imagine would result in a decrease in car values.
And Stuart, along those lines, and I guess I'll open Pandora's box here.
Sure.
There's some proposals before the state legislature strictly related to car tax and maximum mill rates. So how would, assuming one of those proposals came through, and again, nothing's final until it's final there, but how would that impact what we do and in the setting of our mill, then it would be mill rates, one for vehicles, one for real estate and personal property?
From what I've read in the proposed bill, I don't think that would take effect until October 1st, 2022.
Okay, so it wouldn't be this year's budget.
Right.
Well.
But crazy things have come out of Hartford. The other bill from the governor proposing to change the way we assess vehicles should be more alarming, just by how it just handles it.
is that, Stuart, when they just put the car value on the books and then
Yeah.
you just depreciate it and no longer get the NADA?
They're
Is that
recommending
the one
using.
you're talking about?
Yeah, they're recommending using the MSRP, which we know that pre-pandemic, most people bought their car lower than MSRP. but they're recommending MSRP and then having a 20-year life. So it would depreciate over 20 years. And then the maximum or the lowest assessment you'd have is $2,000 on a 20-year-old car.
Is that straight line?
I haven't seen the whole schedule, but yeah, it's a certain percentage every year for 20 years. And then it just stops at $2,000 assessment.
That's very odd. I mean, they tell you that your car depreciates, what, 10% when you drive it off the lot, and now you're talking about 20-year straight line depreciation. It's very odd.
So that's what they're proposing. But then they're going to take the commercial vehicles and put it all on personal property. And then we get a supplemental list every year around November, and they're not going to do that anymore. They're going to send us all the vehicles monthly. And they don't give us all the vehicles now. I can't imagine how they're going to keep track of this monthly. I just think there's a lot of support, I believe, out there for that. I just think it's an administrative nightmare on our end. I think it'll be a lot easier from my office, even though it's going to start in my office. But when it comes to the tax collector side, having to bill out, we get about 3,500 cars on the supple list every year. So we're going to be having 300 and something cars a month that the tax collector is going to have to bill out, keep track of interest if they don't pay, and then report them to DMV for not paying their, if they're late paying and all these things. So on the surface, I think it sounds like a good thing. I think underneath it's just going to be a complete nightmare on our side, and I think it's just going to create a lot more administrative costs here at the local level. And it's a 33-page bill. So anything that's more than just a few pages tends to probably not be a good thing.
Confused?
A lot of depreciation schedules in there.
Just
So Stuart, that NADA that you were speaking of, that's a file that you get from Motor Vehicle Department? That they're putting those numbers in. You're not getting the book and keying it into the town system. You're getting a feed from the Motor Vehicle Department. Is that how it works?
we currently have a contract with the Department of Motor Vehicles. When you buy a new car or a used car, you buy a car at all and you go register it. They do the sales tax based on the NADA guide. That's what they do. Our Assessors Association has a contract with the Department of Motor Vehicles, so when they give us the list, we essentially pay the Department of Motor Vehicles to value the vehicles electronically for us. The only ones we value in, I'll say, manually are the ones that the clerk at the DMV doesn't type the correct VIN number. So if they type a 5 instead of an S or something like that, it won't match the automated process, so it'll kick it out for us to do manually. And then some of the unique stuff in town, some of the trailers, the travel trailers, the motorhomes, things like that, that we value manually, because if you ever valued a motorhome, it'll come up as a Freightliner chassis, but it's a Winnebago. So we don't want them to value it as a Freightliner chassis when it's a $200,000 Winnebago sitting there. So, but that's generally the case. Most of it's valued electronically. So for all those people at home, I don't necessarily see every assessment, because
the software does it for me. I just look for the outliers. So, but you know, motor vehicles is usually our biggest nightmare every year. But traditionally, anything over 20 years old, I value at $500 because that's my biggest complaint area. When I first got here, that was all my appeals, and now I get about 5 appeals on motor vehicles a year. I expect more this year, but I usually get about 5 or less, depending.
Is that the white license plate?
Say again?
The white license plate is,
Oh, the antique, yep.
would mean that it's $500 tax.
The law requires us to assess any vehicle for $500 that has an antique plate, or what is it, early American plate. But as you know, those can be really expensive cars. But the law requires that to be, if they're 20 years old and they have that plate on there, the law sets the assessment for probably 15 years now, 14 years, something like that, since 2008, when they changed the law. For the most part, if it's 20 years old or older on a passenger vehicle, I value it at $500. Mostly because I used to see this like a 1970s Dodge Dart, and this old lady was driving it around town, and it didn't have an antique plate on it, but her assessment was like $2,300, and it was like it was showing its age all the time. And then one day I was sitting right out here on Old Main Street at the intersection at the stoplight, and this Dodge Dart was right next to like a Corvette or something like that with the antique plate, and I was just like, this is crazy. That guy's paying like $12 in tax, and this lady is paying, $60 or $70, and it was like, this is 10 ways to wrong. So, back then I came up and said, hey, I think we should do this, and we did that.
So I have a question about the decline in personal property. So you gave one example of kind of a spike up in the first year of the pandemic when there was a lot of outlays for laptops and other types of hardware, and then that leveled off in year 2 of the pandemic. So does that mean we're now back to close to a norm, like compared to 2018, 2019, or are we sort of below where we used to be? And if so, what do you attribute that to?
Well, part of the decrease in personal property is also the change in law on solar panels. Okay. So the state changed the law on solar panels.
So can you elaborate on that?
So I still don't necessarily fully agree with the statute, but with litigation and all that, and the change in the statute this year, we exempted residential solar panels. So
There was a dispute between, is it the leasing companies?
yes.
Is it taxable or non-taxable?
It was being taxed as business property.
Fought over
Right.
a few years, and then the state legislature finally came in and said it's not taxable. And then going forward, you don't pick anything
Right.
up on the grand list associated with leased solar panels.
Right. They modified the law this past year to broaden the language of the exemption on solar panels.
So solar panels, to the extent that they, I guess, add to the value of a house, you could have some indirect benefit, I guess, from that. But the panels themselves are no longer being assessed separately then?
That's correct.
Okay.
As of this year, solar panels are not. But if you owned solar panels in the past, so if you bought solar panels and you owned them outright, they were always exempt.
As a homeowner, if you own it,
Yes.
you're right, it's not business property, yep.
Right. The issue is that the part of the law that made them accessible was it said for residential purposes. And Tesla owns a large number of solar panels in most jurisdictions in Connecticut and probably across the country. But they would do either a lease or a power purchase agreement. And when you do a power purchase agreement or a lease, Tesla gets the tax incentives from the federal government, not the homeowner. And they sell that credit on the market, the energy credit. So they are invested in green energy, and then they sell that green energy credit to overproducers of pollution and then generate more revenue. And I think that's a commercial purpose, but this year the law changed.
Okay, thank you.
Just real quick, there's no property tax incentives for electric cars, right? That they just hit the grand list like any other vehicle?
They do.
Is there?
Well, we tax them just like any other.
Yeah, no, I didn't know. Yeah, I wasn't sure the answer. Okay.
There is a local option that you could exempt them, but
Right.
Rocky Hill does not have that local option.
And just going back to the real estate portion, the residential real estate portion of the grant list. So, because everybody seems to understand that properties have gone up in value, but because we're not in a reval year, that only if there's a transaction on a property it would change the grand list. Is that how it would work, or?
The only time the value on a property will change before the next revaluation in 2023 is if they improve their property, or if we find a material error in their assessment. So we go out on just about every sale that takes place, and generally when we go out on a sale, we usually find that the previous homeowner did something without a permit or something like, so it'll increase their assessment. But the market value generally won't change until we have the next revaluation. So right now, we're seeing that some properties have sold over $100,000 more than I valued it for in 2018. But if the property is unchanged, their assessment stays as it was, as I assessed it in 2018. Where the adjustment will come is when we do revaluation in 2023. That's when the adjustment will come.
And everything will, fluctuate. Yeah.
Can I follow up with a question on that?
Sure.
So let's say in the year we're in right now, a homeowner adds an addition to their house. And so you then do an inspection to reassess because you became aware of this new addition. Your reassessment, does it allow you to reassess the whole house as an entirety now based on current market conditions, or are you only taking the existing assessment as it was based on 2018 and then adding some increment to that for the new improvements?
We'll do an inspection of the whole property to make sure that we have all the data right, but the value is set based on 2018.
Okay. So the only addition and the upcharge, so to speak, will be just based on the improvements. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and that's important for people to realize because we've gotten a lot of calls on that, probably in the last month or two about what's happening with their value because they're worried about it going up so much, and they're worried about I think it's going to be a blip. I just don't know how long that blip's going to last. Because we have some properties in town that are going to go up at least 50% in value.
Unless the housing market corrects
unless
next
it
year,
corrects.
which it may. So when you do a reassessment based on someone building an addition, is it based on the contract price of what was spent to build that addition, or your assessment of how much it adds to the fair market value of the house?
The increase in assessment goes based on what it would have cost them in 2018, because we know right now if you want to put an addition on your house, the cost is probably 30 or 40% higher than it was in 2018.
So you go back to the 2018 book and based on the square foot, that
Yep.
sort of thing? Okay.
Yep, it's all still valued as if what was there, if it was there as of October 1st of 2018. So whatever it potentially would have cost in 2018 is what I would value it now up until October 1st, 2023.
And you use a book like an appraiser would use per square foot, and then in addition for a fireplace and something else for a half bath, that kind of thing?
Yes. Yep, those values were determined in the last revaluation. They're in our computer-aided mass appraisal system. So although I have a book and I can do it manually, we actually have a computer to help us do that. So it's, it doesn't take me days. It only takes me a short period of time.
Okay, thank you.
So.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, and I'll just repeat what I said earlier. Even though the home values may be going up in 2023, if the mill rate goes down, we end up back. So eliminate some of that panic that everything's more expensive because everything adjusts.
Well,
related.
and that's important for people to know. Just because, when we do revaluation, just because the value goes up, you can't take the current mill rate and apply it, because, if the, for instance, there's I forget what the municipality is right now. Their values went up 18%. Okay. So if the budget stays the same, the rate should come down 18%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Newington had a situation, because they had a reval not that long ago, so I think that makes.
So, if my values go up, the grand list goes up, correspondingly, if spending stays the same, it should go down that amount. So you should never take the new value times the old mill rate, because you would get when the market's going up, you'll get a really high tax bill that is not factually correct.
Yep. So no one should be panicking at home because their property value went up or their car value, because the mill rate will adjust accordingly to what we need to meet our budget.
So, yep.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you, Stuart.
yep. Am I getting off this easy?
That easy, Stuart. We're kind tonight.
I appreciate
Wait
that.
till the budget time. That's what we.
Taxpayers aren't always kind to me.
All right.
I say Mona and John are pretty tough on my budget. All I get to hear is, you can't go up. And so it stays what it is, except for contractual obligations.
Hey, you're not in Berlin.
As much as I hate to say it, this is a much better run town. I wish my town would implement a lot of the things that this town does. Our powers to be just want to just bury their heads in the sand and say we've always done it this way and keep going along. And fortunately, since I've been here, John and Mona's been here as long as I've been here, longer actually, and they've always supported a lot of the innovative things that I've tried to do here, which decrease costs, save the town money, and allowed us to be more efficient. But it's not just me, but it's throughout the town wide that it's done. So kudos to the people that have sat here over the years that have allowed that to happen. Whereas my town says, we're an old cow town. We can't be that. And it's like, no, it hasn't been that way in decades. It's time to change, and they don't want to. So just a little food for thought.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Stuart.
Stuart. You can take tomorrow off.
Monday, too.
All right.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's the last day for people to appeal and go away not happy. So I need to be here.
Thank you. Good night. Good
All
luck
right.
getting into Berlin tonight.
So I'm gonna bring a different car. So
And that was tonight's entertainment.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to item 5, update February 8th bond sale.
Okay. It's a hard act to follow, so let me just move along.
He's not taking a town car home,
Those-
right?
I wouldn't
A
go for
50% increase in something.
All right. So on February 8th, we finally had our closing for the bond sale that we've been discussing for the past several months. So the bond sale was for $10,430,000. That was for a refunding of bonds that we had back in 2014 that were $18 million. So we are now taking this for remaining 12 years, which will close on 2034. I won't go through all the details on the 3 pages, probably for sake of time, if anything. But you can see that what we came in with for the $10,430,000 paid off the previous bonds, their balance, as well as some of the closing costs and underwriting fees. The true interest costs we came in with FNH was the company we went with, was 1.53%. I'm probably most pleased with the 3rd page in the handout, which will show you the annual payments, and we were able to come up with the $1 million savings over that 12-year period. You can see the savings for the first 3 years is larger, so we actually town manager worked with this and came up with the strategy that we would come out higher on those first 3 years because we have other debt that will be closing, so this will balance it off. And as we go into the later years, it will look as a total debt picture, balance itself off nicely. So we felt the savings would be best in the first 3 years.
And the savings is 1.133 million?
Yep,
Correct?
Okay.
over the 12 years.
Over the 12 years,
period.
right.
Weighted it
Yes.
more in the beginning, because I think we have one more bond and maybe 2 or 3 years will be paid off.
Right. So it'll lower our,
debt, as long
Yep.
as we don't go out and build another school, we'll be in good financial shape
okay.
from a debt side.
Any questions on the bond sale?
Not by me.
No? All right. Keep moving on. Item 6.
Just the non-reoccurring, they sent out the packets before I was able to put in the schedule for January, but there's really not much going on. As you can see, pretty much the numbers stayed about the same since December. I think we did make our final payment on the body armor, the cameras for the police
Body cams.
body cams, thank
Yep,
you.
okay.
And so on, and then we did have the repairs associated with the bathrooms with the crushed pipe for the community and senior center. And I don't think the schools did any more damage over the past couple of months, but they're thinking of a few items to go after. So we're still sitting with about $1.1 million in the non-reoccurring fund overall reserve balance, which the rating agency liked to use this like a fund balance because it's a reserve. So it has a positive there.
Any questions on the non-recurring? No?
None here.
All right. Move forward to state aid for municipalities.
Okay, so for the, through the month of January, we received, as expected, our second installment on the town road aid, the $173,000, and we also received our second installment on ECS. So our state grant money are up to date and in balance.
Excellent.
I included an extra page on state aid, which we don't usually have, but wanted to point out that was the notice from CCM on February 9th, because we had some information with the, from the governor's proposed budget on what that may impact on the state grants. And just kind of piggyback on some of the conversation that the assessor was discussing, I'm going to kind of zero in on that column, the second to the right, where it's the governor's fiscal year comparing to the original fiscal year 23. And that's where they're pointing out the motor vehicle tax reimbursement toward the bottom, the $1,000,008. And that's the proposed at that point in time. Obviously, we haven't budgeted for that. That would be a new item. Also, the adjustment that would decrease the ECS. So as we're planning our 22-23 tax revenues and as well as just revenues in general. So if that comes to fruition, looking at the grand list information that Stuart had just shared with us, this 1.8 million would actually bring us in a kind of a shortfall, would you say, of about 100,000. So if we just took our existing mill rate with what Stuart had for his motor vehicle assessments and remove that and use this governor's proposal of 1.8 million, we would actually be coming out short by about 100,000. So this, even though it looks wonderful on paper that it's $1.8 million, capping motor vehicle at 29.1 mill rate and not going our 34.1, which we have in place on the assessed values that that the assessor came up with, there is a difference and not in our favor. So we wanted to point that out, something to watch and see if it follows all the way through the process.
I mean, would the actual reimbursement, if it came to this, actually reimburse us, like, would you actually calculate the loss so we wouldn't have that $100,000 gap, or?
Well, that would be a good question, is if they have determined this on a pre-existing number, if you have the opportunity to say, this is my new assessed value. So I'm just saying, with this snapshot in time, with what we have for the assessed and our existing mill rate, and this being the replacement figure, there's that $100,000 gap.
So, Mona, just two questions on this. In Rocky Hill, we right now use a single mill rate for motor vehicles, personal property, and real estate. Do we have the ability to use a different mill rate within our town statutes to separate motor vehicles from real estate and personal property?
Our tax bills can do that.
And,
I don't know about the statute
Right.
per se.
Okay.
I would tend to think if this gets implemented, however the bill's written, would probably require the towns to do this.
right,
I
well,
don't think you can, I think the state would overrule anything in the town, but I don't think there's anything that segregates.
right, I guess what I'm looking at, and I know they'll find a way to prevent this from coming through, but we should set our town mill rate on motor vehicles at the max, because we're gonna get reimbursed at the difference between our max rate and the 29.
Oh, I see.
And therefore, we offset it. But of course, everybody would have that same role, because 29 is the max, the state pays the difference. And if we separate, we charge more on the vehicle and get the money from the state. I'm sure they'll close that
Probably look
loophole.
deeper into that one.
Yeah. They'll close it before it ever passes, but right now, it's the way it's
They're
written.
not already giving us the difference.
Yeah. Well, but if we, right, but the point is, if we increase the mill rate on the motor vehicles, we could actually get more money.
No, I know
than
what
less.
I know what you're saying.
So
I'm guessing that's.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll get closed before it ever gets opened, but
Well, no, I'm a following though,
Else hold it.
but this statute would cap it at 29, we're at 34 right now.
so that's what the
Correct.
town could charge.
29.
The state reimburses on the
The
difference
excess.
between the 29 and what your mill rate's set at. So if we set it at 34, we could raise it to 46 on the motor vehicle
motor
and get
vehicles.
a bigger difference
get
back
back.
from the state.
I suspect they're gonna figure that out
Yeah,
real
no,
quick.
Trust me, I'm sure they've already, but hey,
Okay.
the way it's written now, I gotta ask the question.
Right.
You may have a client here, Bill.
Yeah, I know.
You make that a class action case?
You guys have criminal?
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm following the law.
I'll give you my card.
All right, kind of lost my track there. I guess state aid for municipalities and I think monthly financials.
Yes. Okay, so on monthly financials, the tax collector's report through January. Obviously, you can see that's at over $7 million in comparison to the benchmark. And we see that when we close out that first month-end payment, January 31st. Sometimes we're comparing it to previous years and where does the 31st end at the end of the month. So we'll see that balance itself out in February, and I think that will give us a better picture of where we truly are on the collections. So we have that tendency to be a bit skewed on just the timing of month end for January. So although that $7 million looks exciting, I think we really need to see how the dollars flow through the month of February. We had discussed earlier if we were doing any collections on the prior year, about the $700,000 that hadn't collected. That's the prior year collections on the upper part of this report. Will show you that the previous year was $117,000, and for this year, we're at $293,000 of collecting those uncollected taxes. So we are collecting, but obviously, when we had mentioned it was $700,000, we aren't collecting 100%, so we'll look at other avenues to do the collections. But overall, tax collections are in a great place. Okay.
If there's no questions, we'll move on to the expense side.
Okay.
Or the additional revenue and then the expense, I'm sorry.
Well, on additional revenues, we've covered tax and state grants. All other revenues are actually doing well. Our fees as far as recording and conveyance and building permits, which are our larger fee line items, are in that over 50%, 60%, which is really the ballpark area we should be for the month end for January. So overall revenues are in good standing at this point in time.
And in the new budget book, I assume we'll lower the threshold for interest on investments?
Dramatically,
Because we're not going to
yes.
be anywhere close.
Yes.
I think we've discussed that previously.
Yes, yeah. Like I said, this is reduced, and it's going to be even more reduced than
Okay.
we've seen. On expenditures, again, if it's thinking through January, looking at about 60% would be a nice benchmark overall. Most departments are right in line, 50 to 60% expended. I would point out in sanitation, at 66%. We're looking, that would be the MDC payment, so it gives that impression of it being slightly skewed. Also on facilities, if you looked at the detail report, you would see the utilities for electric. So I wanted to, you don't need to necessarily pull to that page, but to point out the utilities for electric is really high on that facilities page, but the street lights on the opposite, which is on the highway page, is very low. So we're going through working some, I guess, calculations with the Tesla solar system, where they're having they do their solar energy in blocks. So they do certain blocks, and then they give credit to the bill. So it looks like we have a block of credits going more toward the streetlights instead of the regular town buildings. So you'll see an adjustment to that. We've worked with them just last
We're at the
month.
mercy of the electric company.
We really do, and we're going to see
Where they
that.
apply the credit. And sometimes, in the beginning, they were applying it to something, and we'd have a huge credit on this one bill, and then the other bill would have
Right.
a large.
But the two net out is what you're
To
really
tune
saying.
that out perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I should say that it will probably lean toward slightly over budget, but within, I'd say, about 10% over at this point in projection, if you combine them together. So still something to watch, but if you're looking at them on the line item, it kind of catches the eye. So we need to point that one out. Other than that, I don't think there's anything unusual to point out. The percentages for principal and interest is on timing basis, so that makes those percentages on the high side.
Mona, what about probate court? That looks like it's way under. Is that a
That's
timing
under-
issue? Or?
Yep.
Because of COVID, I think they were closed or something, so they built up a large reserve, and they're passing it back to, I think, Weathersfield, Newington, and Rocky Hill. So pretty much like the first quarter, we didn't have to pay anything.
Okay.
And I think the second quarter, we only had to pay a small amount. So it's more something, a credit that actually is being returned to the town by probate, so.
So for the year, looking the
For the
year
year
forward,
forward.
we'll probably be under.
Yeah.
Because we have a credit being
Yeah.
applied
Right.
from a prior period. Okay. I mean, it's not a giant number to start with, but
No, but
it's only at 7% is.
Right.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody else? No, okay. Do we have anything for other?
You want me to-
No, I'm good. What did
Okay,
you-
no, the only thing we're just talking about is, tomorrow, the departments are supposed to turn their budgets into Mona, and then she'll do her stuff with Munis and rate reports, and then, we'll start reviewing them next week, and then meet with the department heads probably that last week of February, first week of March. So we may, depending on how the budget's going, we may maybe postpone the meeting in, March due to budgets. But if we had something that we needed to discuss or get approved, we would have a meeting, but maybe just a shorter version. We couldn't have Stuart back. But, no, but that's just a heads up that if we get bogged down or something.
I don't think we're going to see a big objection here to not having a meeting, so that, unless there's something that obviously
Yeah.
needs to be addressed.
But at this moment,
Okay.
I don't think so.
So you're talking about that second meeting in March, you mean, then?
No,
No,
the finance meeting for March.
Oh, I'm sorry, the finance
So
committee.
it would be the
Got it.
same date,
Got
March
it.
17th, so we're
Yep.
just saying that we may just request, we don't really
Just
have
not
much
finance.
on there.
Got it,
We
yep.
just- Well, we could send you out, like Mona could put together
Just send you the
the February financials and, some of the reports that you get every month, just, we won't have a meeting about it, you guys could just review them.
Okay,
We can
That
do
way
that,
there.
just keep you in the loop of where we are.
very good. All right, if there's nothing else for other, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.